Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we are live at the World Trade Center in Seattle talking about Budtenders. They're the critical link between bankruptcy and billions. Today, we're here with some fascinating guests. And so we're going to jump right into our panelists here. First, we have Alec Langston. He's a budtender at Dockside Cannabis. Alec has been a cannabis enthusiast for several years and has been budtending for about 3 years now. His passion is educating people about cannabis and budtending, which has been a great outlet for that, being a budtender. His goal is to help as many people and experience this wonderful plant as possible. His favorite part of the cannabis industry is changing that perception of cannabis skeptics and watching customers benefit from the guidance that's incredibly rewarding. And he's looking forward to developing within this industry and meeting new people along the way. We also have Brian Yeager, CEO of LemonHaze.com. LemonHaze is a cannabis tech platform with a history of presenting industry data and more recently hosting events with a focus on budtenders, which is providing innovative and relevant education, networking opportunities, and business exchanges along with nationally recognized entertainers who have a prominent voice in the normalization and growth of recreational cannabis industry. Ashley is a budtender at Green Lady Pot Shop in Olympia. She's a budtender in Olympia with a medical marijuana certificate. Rebecca Berry is a senior account manager at Wurk. Wurk is an all-in-one workforce management solution for highly regulated markets, including the cannabis industry. They've created an intuitive application to manage payroll, HR, timekeeping, and tax compliance with everything you need to streamline operations, reduce labor costs, and minimize regulatory risk. And also, remotely is Claire Kaufmann, Director of Client Services at Brightfield Group. Claire's nationally known CBD and cannabis business and marketing strategist. She currently works as the Director of Client Services at the Brightfield Group, an industry-leading CBD and cannabis market research firm. Claire has worked in the CBD and cannabis space for the past 7 years. She's worked in-house for vertically integrated cannabis companies and formerly as a Northwest Regional Director for BDS Analytics. Claire has also recently served on the OLCC, Recreational Marijuana Business Council in Oregon. Her take on the future trends of the cannabis industry and the question facing marketers and entrepreneurs are sought out by national and international media, cannabis industry leaders, and key players in the traditional marketing world. I'd like to thank everybody for being on board and being on the Talking Hedge podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And about the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center Tacoma grows trade and investment by providing direct access to the largest business network in the world with 300 offices in 99 countries. The World Trade Center in Tacoma is a lone trade service center for the Pacific Northwest. They have seminars and award ceremonies, conferences that can generate contacts and contracts. Trade research can clarify opportunities, and their matchmaking can turn those opportunities into trade. One of the things that I like about the World Trade Center is it gives me peace of mind knowing that I can use international guarantees or bank guarantees as a member. And also the e-commerce export store, they've partnered with Alibaba, which is translated into 18 languages and provides an opportunity to sell your product online internationally to hard-to-reach places like Asia. And so just jumping right into some of these questions, I basically want to start off with a broad understanding of what a budtender is. So a budtender provides customer service to all patients and customers in medical and recreational dispensaries. They use a point of sale system and other technologies to ensure all cannabis sales are properly tracked. They provide information to customers on product choices, consumption methods, compliance, and safety, and remain up to date on all cannabis regulations to ensure compliance. What's your favorite product, and what is the number one product you're seeing customers buying?
Well, this is Claire Kaufmann from Brightfield Group. I think it really depends what customer group we're talking about because different kinds of customers want different kinds of products and different kinds of potency and are willing to spend different amounts of money on those products. So on the whole, we're still seeing flower dominate sales, but just barely. I think to echo what was said, cartridges are the next biggest category. In states like California, they're already eclipsing flower in terms of revenue. I also think we're seeing a lot of evolution with regard to edibles. I wouldn't say that it's, of course, like one of the top performing ones, but in terms of category velocity, edibles is seeing some growth. And I think also we're seeing some run for your money in terms of some of the CBD products, or at least the low dose or microdosing products. I don't know if others have also experienced that, but that's what I see.
Rebecca, anything to add to that?
I mean, I think we're definitely seeing an increase, at least in my market, with CBD products and the expansion of that. There's to Claire's point too, it just depends on your consumer and the market that you're in and, really what their needs are. So I see a lot of growth across the board. I think some of the challenges we came into last year with edibles in Seattle kind of put a slowdown on that. However,
yes.
I do see an increase for sure.
My favorite product is definitely hard to say, but I think a lot of the Fair Winds products specifically I'm really impressed with, especially the PM Relief 300 tincture. It's a high CBD tincture focused on nighttime pain relief and sleep. And why I like the product is because it not only utilizes cannabinoids, but terpenes and other plant extracts to help give specific effects. And just as a product, it is very well rounded and can be used by a range of uses, right?
What is the number one product you're seeing customers buying?
I think cartridges are a big seller. Cartridges are a big seller because of their ease of use and convenience. They don't smell as much as a normal flower would. I think cartridges, just because of their ease of use and convenience, is such a big thing for our market currently.
What we did for our market research is we went and we stood outside of larger shops, Uncle Ike's, Have a Heart, Clear Choice in Bremerton, Satori, Lucid, and we always asked at least a group of 10 people to have a minimum statistic, and we asked them if they knew what they were looking for that day, and then when they walked out, we asked if they made the selection of what the Budtender recommended. And that's where we were really able to gauge that 50% margin for our numbers, where guests of the retail shops were listening to the Budtender's recommendation.
For quantifying them, that would be challenging. I think some of the guidance and advice that they provide to consumers as they're coming into these stores. We put a price tag on it, right, with their hourly rates, and then some stores, depending on the states, they can accept tips. However, that knowledge and background of those budtenders who take it upon themselves to educate themselves and spend time learning about the plant and the different effects that it might have on one individual or another, depending on what they're looking for. It's really challenging to put necessarily a price tag on that, I think, or quantify that. Because it really is, it's difficult to measure because they are such valuable assets. Now, that being said, you can look at, okay, here's the amount of sales that one Budtender is bringing in versus another Budtender, and kind of look at, what they're, how many of them have repeat customers, and start to offer kind of performance management or performance-based incentives to some of those Budtenders for what they're able to bring in terms of customers and repeat customers. So difficult to quantify, but if you really like to dive deep into data, and if we had tools in the cannabis industry that allowed us to dive deep into data and allowed us to capture that kind of information, then perhaps we would be able to measure it a little bit easier. But it's kind of like I don't want to relate it to a cruise ship, but everybody at the dispensary, everyone has to work together, and everyone impacts one another. So if your inventory person isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I come in and I'm used to asking for one thing and that's not in stock because the inventory person didn't do it, then that impacts the Budtender's ability to sell me that product. And even though I'm a repeat customer and I'm always coming in for that exact same product. So everybody has to work together as one cohesive unit to make sure everyone is successful at the store.
These business owners do realize that the Budtenders are absolutely key to the customer experience and the ultimate success, failure, or profitability of these firms. There seems to be an increasing number of them that, there's the ones that are relatively new that kind of took on people within their immediate networks and are finding that a lot of the friends and family type recruiting is starting to run up against its limits and are seeking out people who are highly experienced in other types of high-end retail that can create a very similar experience in their stores. A lot of folks positioning their retail experience at that high end and wanting to reflect that sort of experience. So certainly on the qualitative side, we see that businesses are increasingly aware of the value of that. And then also people trying to match the personality of their neighborhood. We recently worked with a dispensary in Capitol Hill that wanted to make sure that their management and who would also be responsible for hiring the various other Budtenders would be very reflective of the vibe of the neighborhood, so all these things factor in.
Yeah, well, and those Budtenders, I mean, really what they're doing is relationship building, and with every customer that comes in, that could be a potential repeat customer, and so they're building. They're really great Budtenders, build relationships with every single customer that's coming through the door. So the next time they walk in, they're like, "Oh, and how is your dog doing today?" And how was that vacation that you were going to go on? Oh, weren't you taking product to go into the mountains hiking? Or are you doing that again? So they meet these individuals as they come into purchase. They internalize that, and that's how they get those repeat customers. And they're really great Budtenders. I've been to a few stores where it seems like they remember everything about me, and those are the stores that I'm going to keep, and those Budtenders that I'm going to keep going back to, because they're just really great at building those relationships and getting people in.
We see a lot of pre-rolls being sold, a lot of concentrates are popular. And then on the flip side, to Claire's point, I think there's a lot of CBD, and that the tinctures and topicals aren't being sold as much. You can see that in the numbers, but inferring on that data or lack of data, I think has a lot to do with, the fear factor, if you will, people not wanting to go into a dispensary for the fear of the unknown. And so they're going to go and find, some isolate, which has been called hot dog water on this podcast before. And so I think as education comes out, we'll see a lot more of those products increase in terms of sales and transaction sizes. But in the meantime, there's definitely an increase in those minor cannabinoids like CBG, CBN, and eventually THCV. So a Budtender's primary goal is pretty much selling the, quote, right strain. And so they need to know their patient's needs. They need to know the cannabinoid and terpene profiles, know their growers and what's on the shelf. And so in terms of knowing like habits to avoid, that's also something that Budtenders have to be aware of. And so there's some that lack that knowledge about products. And so I'm curious, Rebecca, what technologies have you seen, or what do you guys recommend over there at Wurk to train people to prepare them on how to choose the right products?
Yeah, Josh, that's a great question. I think it's challenging because it depends on concept to concept and business owners and how knowledgeable they are on their own product, along with compliance and legislation and, certain amounts that can be sold per customer. What is the best strain? How do they educate their Budtenders coming on? And the biggest thing is the compliance piece of understanding that. So, with coming from kind of a non-compliant industry, actually a very non-compliant industry in years past, it's really, there's no good SOP in place. I feel as if we're moving forward, we're trying to get there. So it's really up to each owner operator to provide the right education and really have a good understanding of the products that they're bringing on and a great relationship with the providers of those products, whether it be anything from CBD to tinctures to whatever they may be offering. The onboarding piece is always challenging, where there should truly be, a strong recruitment background to understand the the background of the applicant and the person you're bringing on board so that they're educated and able to speak properly to patients and clients.
Brilliant. And Alec, do you have any follow-up on how you were trained for your employer on how to recommend or help choose the right strain?
So, when I first started Budtender, I did start at Origins Cannabis, and there was a pretty lengthy training process. It was about 2 weeks of training, just going through how the store was organized and what strains were where and how it was divided up. And that was, definitely a long training process. When I started at Dockside, I didn't get that just because I already was kind of trained up and it wasn't really necessary. And it's not only the responsibility of the employer to train their employees. I think it's also the employee's responsibility to train themselves in some fashion. Just because at the end of the day, it's all about a budtender making a relationship and building trust with their customers. And because of that, like, you have to delve into so many different aspects of cannabis and what the plant can do that you kind of have to train yourself along the way as well. And I think what makes that easier is transparency and communication, like from the producers directly to the budtenders, like providing little information packets about new products coming out, being available on email, like we have questions about something. For example, Dockside Cannabis, they'll put out a little information packet in a communication binder for all the budtenders to read if we have something new coming in, so we know what it is and how to sell it and really who to sell it to, who's looking for it.
I like the idea of being cross-trained as a budtender with producer processors. Claire, have you seen or has Brightfield Group reported on any technologies or any training to help customers see what the potential is or the right products?
In some ways, just briefly to backpedal, I don't think that the importance of budtenders can be overstated. I've sat in the marketing and consumer research space in this sector for years, and they are 100% the most underrated and oftentimes undercompensated branch of this industry. And oftentimes what I tell my brand clients is, we can try our best to sell your products, but who really sells your products is budtenders. And in no other consumer vertical do you have such an involved relationship with a broker in terms of, it's not like you go into an alcohol, store and have to purchase it all through someone at the counter. So the relationship and the rapport that's built between not just the brands that dispensaries sell, but the consumers that they serve is imperative. And I think to piggyback off what you were saying before, I think how to train budtenders to sell products and or not sell products depends on whether you're in a state that allows vertical integration or not. So in Oregon or in different states where vertical integration is allowed, you may oftentimes see budtenders trained to push products that are manufactured by the parent company before you're willing to see them provide the others. And of course, 100%, they need to put the well-being of the customer first. But if there is a product that fulfills that need, sometimes you will see their training incorporate, the connection that they have to different brands. In terms of research, I think that it's an area of the industry that is very devoid of research. And I know that this is one issue we'll be talking about later, but a lot of that, I believe, is a result of turnover and rapid turnover. And, the first economics class I ever sat in college, they talk about the root of all human behavior is incentives. So I think, one of the things that budtenders need to do is to be better incentivized to stick around and to have the institutional knowledge that they gain over the years of serving customers to really serve their needs truly and make sure they can be matched with the right products.
100%. You've led into a few questions that we're going to dive into as this podcast progresses, but I want to follow up on an article that was written at brightfieldgroup.com about the importance of budtenders I think the article was titled Insights for Dispensaries and Importance of Budtenders. And I'll just quote some of that.
Thank you for citing that. Yes.
Yeah. It says that some outside the industry might smirk at the notion of budtending as an illegitimate profession, but those in the know understand that they're a key component of making their cannabis succeed. In reality, the vast majority of patients and consumers take budtender recommendations very seriously. 22% of respondents buy from dispensaries or recreational shops that report always following the budtender's recommendation, whereas another 69% seriously consider budtender recommendations, although they weigh other factors as well. And interesting, those who spend more per week on cannabis and consume more frequently have a higher opinion of the knowledge of their local budtenders and follow their recommendations more often. And this is significant because in many markets, as much as 3/4 of sales come from those users. And so, Claire, how do you quantify how important budtenders are to cannabis brands?
Well, that's a really good question, and one that we're actually trying to address right now. I wish I could be more specific. But yes, so in terms of how to quantify the importance of budtenders to brands, we use this study in particular. But what we're really trying to do is to help understand how to get budtenders to understand the value of different brands, if that makes sense. So sometimes you will see that budtenders have such a huge influence on sales. I have seen customers, so at Groundworks, where I was working in Oregon, we ran Zahra and Electric Lettuce, and combined we had about 15 different retail outlets. And people are so loyal to their budtenders that they will leave one dispensary and go to another to follow a budtender that they have trust in. Because as you know, especially in the flower world, and even some in the concentrates world, there's no set SKUs. So oftentimes you go in, the product's different. And even though your medical condition is the same, what you need is different. So if you don't have a budtender to connect the dots for you, you really are just sort of throwing things against the wall. In terms of quantifying, what we do with our different brand clients is we usually find a subset of dispensaries we're looking to get into, and we'll actually sometimes do focus groups and have them try the product before it even goes to market, to get their feedback on it, and if they would be willing to recommend it, and if they wouldn't, what do they need from the product in order to feel confident in that recommendation? And that kind of focus group and that kind of insight is so important to the brands that we work with.
Rebecca, I know that at work with HR, you see a lot of people come in and maybe they have a different idea of what the cannabis industry is going to be. Some people make it, some don't. What are you seeing with some of the qualities of people that do make it? And how does Wurk sort of quantify how important it is for budtenders and the brands that they represent, and the brands that they represent?
Yeah, I think too, to a lot of our clients, like having that education piece and, understanding the product is key. I think we see a lot of people who see this fun industry to come into, and again, my big piece is always compliance because that's what we focus on, and not understanding the compliance piece of it and how critical these budtenders are to the clientele and ensuring that the right strands are chosen and the right product is pushed to the customer. We do see a lot of churn. As you can imagine, we have people who do hop from different concept to different concepts, but they also, tend to follow a brand that they like or a leadership that they like that may go to another brand. So it's really a big piece of keeping that preventative turnover is the education up front, the training up front, knowing who you're hiring ahead of time. And, I think we spoke to this earlier too, having a budtender who really has done their own education and has their knowledge to come in to stick by the brand and the product. But the churn is definitely a huge piece of what we see in this industry. And it's about ensuring that your employees are invested in and that they feel needed, that they're incentivized. And that's a huge piece of preventing that turnover, is keeping good people.
So Alec, as a budtender in Seattle, I'm curious about why budtenders are the gatekeepers to the billion-dollar legal cannabis industry. And so I want to ask you essentially what compels you about a particular product or brand to recommend it to customers. So as we've seen, Brian Yeager of Lemon Haze is a panelist today, and he had mentioned that consumers are still walking into recreational cannabis shops with no idea of how many options are available. He said that in an article, I'm quoting him as saying that budtenders are absolutely drive customer decisions. So lemonhaze.com uses retail data to track Washington's cannabis market. And Brian said it's widely understood in the industry that budtenders can have a huge influence over consumer choice. Washington is the only state with recreational cannabis where cannabis stores cannot be owned by farmers or processors. And the division between the production business and the retail stores has led to a huge array of different brands and products. Washington has more brands and products than Oregon and Colorado combined. And so Colorado-based data from BDS Analytics tracks over 1,000 cannabis brands, producing over 45,000 unique products during a 12-month span in Washington and Colorado. So Colorado only has 274 brands producing 11,000 products, while Oregon has 431 brands making about 10,000 products. So some retail stores limit how many they have, offering only a handful, but like many, like at Have a Heart, they stock a wide array. And so essentially, with all of these brands and all of this competition, Alec, what compels you about all of those brands and products in order to recommend it to a customer?
Well, first I'd like to say I do like the term gatekeeper. I feel like that's very fitting to what my duty is as a budtender. What compels me to recommend a certain product? I think the first thing is personal experience with it. I mean, I make an effort to try as many things as I can in the stores, so I really know what the effects are and why I would recommend this certain thing to a certain person, depending on what experience they're looking for. But what compels me to recommend something specifically is consistency. I think consistency is super important in the cannabis industry, just because without consistency, a strain that's working for someone 1 week, if it changes too much, if the grow changes or they try something different, if it changes, then that person has to find new medicine. They have to find some new medicine, right? So I think consistency of products is probably the number one thing that compels me personally to recommend a product. But I'm also not just recommending something based on what my experience is. I'm trying to gauge what experience someone is looking for. So the first thing I ask when people tell me, when people come in is what do you want to feel like? And whether that be an edible or flower or whatever, I ask them what they want to feel like and try and gauge, are they trying to be creative, focused? Are they trying to be relaxed? Are they trying to deal with anxiety? And that's kind of what I do to try and zero in on what the customer, what the individual wants.
I wanted to get Ashley's take on quoting Brian in a recent article saying that budtenders absolutely drive customer decisions. So Ashley, what compels you about a product or brand in order to recommend it to customers when there's so many out there?
One that wasn't mentioned in that list was pesticides used or any other ingredients. What they're using as pesticides, whether that be actual pesticides on the market or all natural ones, like rosemary, thyme, those type of all natural herbs that you can use as well. That for me anyways, and the shop that I work at in Olympia is huge. We only have about one big vendor that still uses pesticides that we carry pretty regularly, but it's a big name, so it's kind of one of those things in the market. People know big names as branding, and they go for the Fat Pandas of the Northwest Cannabis Solutions. Those are neither of the people that I'm talking about, but we'll go with the big name brands that they know of instead of a small no-name farm unless it has a huge budtender following.
Yeah, I think that's, as personally, as a cannabis user, I've been using cannabis for about 15 years now. I feel very comfortable with specific brands, but at the same time, there are budtenders that I've had relationships with, and that longevity of trust builds on me following their recommendation. And I feel really blessed to have those relationships, and very rarely do budtenders steer me wrong. So it's so great to have that knowledgeable lead behind the counter steering me in the right direction.
Claire, have you seen any data with Brightfield Group on how online orders or customer service and loyalty rewards impact repeat sales?
No, but I do have experience based on that from my work at Groundworks. So in terms of loyalty programs, they do tend to work pretty well. I think in terms of actual data on how well, I don't know. Sorry to be so profoundly helpful with my answer. But no, I mean, I think that Budtenders in general really can make or break a brand. And I don't oftentimes, at least when I talk to VPs of marketing for big brands, they don't often understand it. Or if they do understand it, they oftentimes don't want to acknowledge it. And I think they have to walk a fine line, you know, between, in some cases, ethos sells a brand. Budtenders often, I don't want to use the word old school, but sometimes they really value companies and they really know a lot about the ethos of those companies, and that drives a lot of their recommendations. In addition to, I think one of the Budtenders spoke about reliability and trustworthiness and how important that is to customers. So I think what we really need to do as a market research firm is to start to quantify what brand attributes really matter the most to consumers, and see if those align with what brand attributes matter to brands, to Budtenders. I remember when I was at Groundworks, we did a big interview with all of our Budtenders, who collectively we had more than 120 Budtenders. And then we did an interview with thousands of our customers, and we asked them to rank the importance of different attributes in terms of how they buy products. And there were things, I think the 7 things on the list were Budtender recommendation, price, potency, aroma, jar appeal, effect, farm or producer, and I tried it last time. And we saw that Budtenders really cared about the company that made the product, and especially I'm talking about flower, like really care about the company that produced that flower, and and the terpene content ranked very high. THC was 3rd or 4th, and we found that consumers are, of course, shocker, price driven primarily, and that out of the total list, the last thing they cared about was who made it. And so I think that brands find themselves in quite a conundrum, relying on Budtenders, but perhaps struggling with the fact that consumers don't have the education to even discern or know the difference.
I just did a podcast on the OK program here in Washington State. That's a pesticide kind of testing program, and there's some issues with products that probably shouldn't be on the shelf. And so definitely with me, I have reduced the amount of oil after one of the companies had Eagle 20, an herbicide, and when heated turns into carcinogen. So I stopped buying vape cartridges. I stopped buying joints after Jim McRae's Straight Line Analytics report, and the OK program came out with 5 infused and 5 regular joints, all 10 of them having way too much mold. And so definitely an issue for me. That's absolutely how I make my decisions. And so, Brian, do you have anything to add to that? And have you seen with Lemon Hazer or in your own experiences how online orders, customer service, and loyalty rewards impact repeat sales?
There are several platforms out there. Some have done better than some have not done as well. We try to encompass as many people as we can into our events and learn as much about everybody. But as of today, I personally, at least in the state of Washington, I can't speak for California or some of the other states, there hasn't been anything that has really taken over or really had a huge impact. There's a lot trying new things. There's going to be some new stuff coming down the pipe. But the reality is we live in an Amazon world, and until the day you can actually pay for it online, nobody's really going to take advantage of that. There's no real reason to.
Not even the 10% discount.
Ashley probably answer that better than I can because she's the one that sits there and looks at it. But what we've seen, even when we were data and we were looking at it, we did not see huge amounts of of discounts online making that big of a difference in sales. I'm not saying they don't. This is more anecdotal over the course of the last year because our data went away over the last year.
Right.
But even when we did have all the data and we did track everything, we weren't tied directly into the POS systems. We weren't seeing a lot of online. And I'm not saying it's not there. Baker does a great job. I mean, I like it. I don't want to run off, but there's a bunch of great companies out there that do a great job and they're working hard. And there's a lot of companies right now that are positioning, so they understand they're losing money. They don't mind losing money because they understand if they can be in position to be the Amazon when it does go federally legal and you can start making payments, that it's all about where your position is then. I mean, how many years did Amazon lose money? 24 years, something like that? But it was all about establishing where they were, and look at them now. And that's what you're seeing out of some of these. And, there's some 800-pound gorillas in the room, but there's also people coming up that are doing a great job.
Well, that's a good transition for the next question, Alec, about some mishaps in the industry. So the companies spend a lot of money on production and marketing and packaging, and yet we still see some stores displaying the product turned over so that budtenders can see the strain name or the THC potency testing on the back of the package. So this would be considered a huge blunder in any traditional retail outlet if you're going to spend $50,000 on marketing and branding. And yet a lot of this is dismissed because it's a nascent industry. So Alec, similar to packaging being turned around, are you seeing anything at Dockside or what other mishaps have you seen?
Mishaps. Yeah, I think proper labeling. There has been some mishaps with things improperly labeled, or I think one of the most recent things was an edible company we brought in. They were actually way over the limit for what they should have had in their products, and we had to send that back. And that all comes back to consistency, just being consistent with your product. But we're not defined by our mistakes. We're defined about how well we bounce back from them, right? So just keeping informed on what mishaps could occur and why they occurred, and what we can do to move away from them. I mean, that's what we're about at Dockside, at least.
Rebecca, you probably see a lot of fun stuff. Do you have anything that you can share about being an early new industry, some mishaps that people can learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the packaging, to just reiterate that, is a huge thing. I think we spend a lot of money on that brand recognition, but for education within our budtenders, we don't have it aligned, so it's phasing out. There's a lot of mishaps that have happened in the media with certain brands that can bring that down too. I do see also with the online ordering, when we go back to brand recognition there, it's again that relationship and culture between your budtender versus just going online to place an order for something. So I think a lot of that advertising, we need to get more back to the core of the actual product and the value of the product incorporated in that relationship with your budtender and your brand.
Yeah, so I want to kind of expand on that a little bit. So one thing we know, we base our entire business off allowing the brand to market directly to the budtender because the brand can't market many other ways. And what's really been interesting, and it's been really fun to watch, over I say fun, depending on whose perspective you're talking about, over the last couple of years, which companies dedicate a certain amount of their marketing budget strictly to budtenders. Because the problem with marketing to budtenders is it's almost impossible to track your ROI. If you're doing a sales event and you're like, okay, I just met with 50 buyers and I got in 6 new shops, I know I've got X amount more sales than I had last month. When you're doing something with budtenders, and I talked to 1,000 budtenders, and I made an impression on hopefully 250 of them, and those 250 started pushing my product. Those 250 are spread out over 250 shops, or maybe less than that, but 150 shops. It's almost impossible to track that because you don't know where it happened. Now, there are POS systems out there that do, even Greenbits and some of the other ones, they do technically track what the budtender sells, each budtender. But what I've noticed, and as we've talked to a lot of these guys, most of them, because there is a high budtender turnover, they don't put it in the system. They don't track it that much. Really not all that. Because it's a lot of work to get their budtender. So tracking that ROI for the advertising to your budtender is hard to do. And it's been really interesting that I've noticed over the course of the last year and a half is the the brands that will come in and they will drop a ton of cash on marketing to the budtender. And then because they can't really justify the ROI, they stop. But then they start getting passed up by other companies that are marketing the budtender, and they hear the budtenders talking about other companies. Again, all anecdotal, and they come back. So it's really interesting. It's almost impossible to track that ROI. So you have to set aside a certain amount of marketing budget. And I'll give you a perfect example. A company that does an amazing job with that is PAX. PAX, now granted, they have huge deep pockets, but they may spend $6,000 buying a booth at an event like ours, and then drop $25,000 of what they actually do to actually market that budtender when they're there. But they work on that budtender, and I think they're seeing results.
Ashley, have you seen any other mishaps with packaging being turned around or anything weird like that?
Yeah. Almost, I mean, since the beginning of when I started, there's always going to be packaging issues. It's really tough to fit all those, the warning label and all the THC and content in a little tiny sticker. And I sell for Wild Mint topicals too, and we just have our label on the front and then our little sticker on the back. So if it can't fit in one of those, it's not on our package. And it's unfortunate, but it's what you deal with as a business. Just gotta put faith in your budtenders, knowing about your product and pointing it out more or less.
So transitioning into job growth, there's at least 165,000 workers in the cannabis business across the country, according to MJ Business Daily. So it's a newsletter that tracks the cannabis industry. And in Colorado, the most established cannabis market in the country has over 1,000 dispensaries, almost 1,500 grow operations, and over 500 processors. There's over 38,000 people that have cannabis careers in Colorado. In the state of Washington, there's 465 dispensaries, 1,100 grow operations, 253 processors, and almost 11,000 people employed in business, including almost 4,000 in dispensaries alone. And yet in restaurants, we've seen a lot of touch screens that are being added for ordering. And I'm wondering, in the future, with vending machines, online orders, and touch screens to eliminate labor costs, how will brands differentiate or stand out if they're going to try and automate budtenders? How are they going to stand out for budtender recommendations or customer purchases?
I could chime in on this one. When restaurants automate and use technology, a consumer understands what a salmon is. They understand, what a salad is. They've got a experience level with eating that they don't have with cannabis. And I also think that's important when you sell most CPG products, consumer packaged good products, you're really selling it twice, right? Because the first time you're selling it, the consumer hasn't tried it yet. So that's when your packaging speaks, and that's when your, budtender incentives matter, and that's when the presentation of it really matters because the consumer hasn't tried it yet. So that's their perceived value of the product. But the second time you have to sell it is you have to deliver. The product has to deliver. And that's how you get that repeat purchase. So I think we're likely to see a division between products that customers buy for the first time and products that customers come back to buy. I think that we might see initial purchases still be driven by budtenders, but repeat purchases perhaps be driven by online once the consumer and brand loyalty has been won.
Alec?
Yeah, I was gonna back that up with a lot of customers that come in and they'll talk to me for a bit and they'll find out what they want and why they want it, and my goal, my selling style is education. Like, I'm gonna tell someone the most information possible about that product, right? But with those online orders, I think what that comes down to, online orders specifically, is those are for people that know what they want, right? That have been using it consistently. They don't necessarily need to come in and learn new information about it. They can just order it online. They know what they're getting. They know it works, and they get that 10%. And of course, a big deal of that is money too. That 10% really does help a lot of people out. On the other side of that, some people are willing to not get the 10% discount just to come interact with the budtenders, with the team, just in case there's new information. And at Dockside specifically, we're not really perturbed if someone wants to change their online order, or they come in and they're like, oh, hey, Alec, what's new? What's going on? And I say, oh, well, actually, this is new. This came in. We can add it to your order. That's fine. So I think that's kind of where that specific area comes in.
Just a quick question to ask actually you guys based on that. So I've always been kind of curious about this. It's one thing that we've always noticed. So this is people arguing this, but in my opinion, marijuana is a commodity. It's something that's bought and sold on a certain on a certain price point for what it is, regardless. But it's also like wine, because your crop for wine is 1 year, your crop for wine is the next year. So if I walk in, and I'm just going to pull this out here, if I walk in and I buy Trailblazing Blue Dream, I may walk in 2 months later, same retailer, still Trailblazing, still Blue Dream, but it's a different crop. It may be a totally different effect. Does that affect people's ability, want to go back and order the same thing, or do they want to ask about the crops and things like that?
It's really hard to still explain to people that same thing, that weed is more like wine than anything else, because numbers go up and numbers go down depending on what they had tested, whether that had been a plant in the west side of the room or a plant on the east side of the room. One can be 31, one can be 21. So especially with like the lower budget stuff, people are very picky. If it doesn't continuously test at the same percentage, it's no good to them anymore, even though it's the same strain that's probably going to give them the same effect.
And Alec had mentioned the consistency is a huge portion. We're seeing that with pre-rolls, and that's a lot about convenience, but people want consistency. And yet with wine, you can see that 2015 might be a good year, whereas 2017 might be a bad year. And yet with Blue Dream, I mean, that thing has been bastardized, where it was a sativa. And now I swear, I just bought Blue Dream, and I am convinced it's maybe not an indica, but an indica-leaning hybrid. And it makes me lethargic, so I had to go out and buy something else, because I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, so the whole percentage conversation is a big thing that's always ongoing. My personal opinion, I think it's an average at best, and it's not what I focus on when I'm deciding on my own product. What I focus on, and what I tell customers, what I suggest that customers focus on is genetics and the grow style specifically. Just because, like, if you're gonna get a sun grown, you'll probably have like a little more specific flavor from it. Versus like an indoor and like a hydro or something. But at the end of the day, Blue Dream, blueberry and haze, like it's genetics, right? So let's say something like a new strain comes in. I don't know what it is. No one's tried it. What are the genetics? Maybe I've tried the 2 strains that make it up, or 3 strains, or whatever it is, right? And by those genetics of what those strains should do, like that is what I go off of. If something new comes in that I don't know what it is. So I think genetics and knowing the genetics are really important as a bud tender.
Yeah, we just did a terpene panel last month at the World Trade Center in Tacoma. Had Allison Drayson and True Terpenes and some other great panelists on board. And David Haldreth had made a really interesting point about CBD and THC percentages being the gas on a vehicle, the analogy of driving a car, whereas terpenes were the steering wheel. It gives you the direction you want. Do you want euphoric, energetic, uplifting, or do you want to be relaxed? And that's the direction is more of the terpene profile, where the gas, the percentage is how fast you're going to go. And so I found that pretty interesting. So it is about genetics. I think it's about the smell and the nose, and when everything's packaged, it kind of takes that away. But that's maybe a podcast for another day.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. Is like a big thing is the nose knows, right? And our customers have to trust that our nose knows, I guess is the best way to put it, because they can't smell it, right? A big thing is terpenes, and if you can't initially smell those terpenes and kind of guess what they're gonna do, then that's where our job comes in. We have to convince someone that this is what it's gonna do.
And so how do we stop the bleeding, the turnover? The revolving door of bud tender turnover in the cannabis industry is significant. There's a Headset article that, according to business intelligence platform Headset, data collected in Colorado and Washington State showed a 30% bud tender turnover period during 12 months. So a Headset reported from June of 2018 found that turnover was exceedingly common and often happened before new hires could even settle into work. But there are also turnover spikes that tend to follow busy seasons like summer. So a recruiting partner with THC Staffing Group said that some new employees find that they're not as committed as they thought. So you see higher turnover across the board depending on what the job is and what factors led to that employment to be disappointed. And so the survey on that data cited that they quit maybe because there's a lack of SOPs. I'm not really sure, but Rebecca, what are you seeing? What's up with the turnover in the cannabis industry, and how do you stop it?
Yeah, Josh, I think, again, the biggest thing is culture, to touch on that. And with having so much opportunity and so many available jobs in this industry, it's really key on getting employee engagement immediately and through that onboarding process, and ensuring that you're seeing trends within your employees. Wurk provides a system where we can actually see if employees are starting to show up late to work, or maybe try to swap out more shifts, or not showing up at all. And it gives you kind of a proactive approach to have that engagement conversation prior to losing somebody. So there's specific trends in the industry you can start to see throughout seasons or throughout just different concepts across the board. And having that visibility into the employee engagement piece is really huge on preventative churn. And again, incentives. Keep people happy before it's too late. There's, a shop down the street that'll pay them 25 cents more an hour. They may take that because they're not feeling appreciated, and we need to recognize that ahead of time. So it's definitely something that it's very, and you speak to the restaurant industry when you're talking about the kiosks, it's very comparable in that industry as well. So as an owner, a manager, an admin in a dispensary or wherever it may be, being able to look at those trends prior to a problem will prevent that churn.
What's your take on it, Brian?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. Well, one, I absolutely agree that pay is a big deal. I mean, we know a lot of budtenders. I've known Ashley for a long time now, and I hear about that. But here's let me throw this in, and I wish I actually had these numbers directly with me, but I didn't think to bring them. We guesstimate that there's around 3,500 to 5,000 budtenders in the state of Washington right now. We polled every budtender we had in our database. We have a pretty extensive database of budtenders. This was about a year ago, and we had over 350 budtenders respond. And one of the questions we had was, what is budtending to you? And it was a job for right now. Is it a stepping stone into management? Is it, and there was something, and the last one was a calling. Is it a calling? Over 30% of 350 budtenders that responded actually responded, it is a calling. So unlike somebody that's a sales associate at Foot Locker or wherever like that it's a job, there's a big chunk of budtenders out there that truly believe and love what they do. But the reality is that, and we've made a whole business on this, they're the most underappreciated people in the industry. They're I don't want to say the lowest paid. There may be some trimmers and things like that, but they're not paid as well as others. But they drive the whole thing, and they believe in it more than most.
Rebecca, are you seeing that new hires have unrealistic expectations about working in the cannabis industry, or is it more about pay?
I think it's a good mix. I think that our industry is so unique that, they don't realize the challenges that come into play, as we just spoke about with pay, allocating that 280E and ensuring exempt and non-exempt labor is, allocated properly across the board, can help to increase pay towards your budtenders by being able to have the non-exempt labor piece go into payment somewhere. But that it does affect them. I think they get into this not realizing, as you're saying, budtenders are completely underappreciated, but yet they're the most valuable employee that we have.
Does Wurk provide, and that's enjoywurk.com, WURK, does Wurk provide proper SOPs for new employee onboarding, or what do you suggest?
So we do have an HR consulting segment called Managed Services, and we do have HRIS business partners, which will help to drive that handbook and drive those SOPs. So it is something we're seeing a need for in the industry that we do offer through our program as well, because a lot of times it's just not drawn out well. There's not necessarily a specific protocol we work hand in hand with each different company on what their needs are and what their value is with their employees. So it is something that we do offer though in the industry.
Ashley, what's your opinion about the proper SOPs for new employee onboarding?
The first shop I got hired on at, it was just kind of thrown into the mix. Like right as soon as 502 started in 2015, it was just, there was no procedures really for new hires. They just learn your products on the wall and look it up, figure out if it's sativa or indica. I mean, nowadays at the shop that I'm at now, Green Lady Eastside Olympia, there's a lot better resources to look into for people who really are just getting into the industry and don't know anything. Now I'm a little bit past that, but we're the sole medical provider.
So as a follow-up, Ashley, there's high growth stores that are 40% that have a high turnover rate. And so all of this is about high performers sticking around. We see stores between 20 and 40% growth have more stable workforce with lots of quote midterm employees that are 60 to 120 days that stick around, and almost no short timers that are less than 60 days. So the data suggests that while it might not matter how many people you go through, if you're churning and expanding at an insane pace, it seems like the people who are growing a little slower and a little steadier do benefit from a lower turnover. So the highest performing budtenders have the highest retention rates. Obviously, it feels good to be good at what you do, but they're probably also making a killing in tips. Is that even relevant in Washington? And how does turnover affect growth?
I think the return customer base, since I'm medical, they like to deal with the same person every time. We'll get people, patients waiting on their specific budtender to help them, whether that be because they trust the recommendations or because they just want to converse with them and hang out with them for a little bit during their day. But that all leads to what products they're consuming regularly. So if that budtender is now gone, that consumer or patient is either going to go find where they went or go find another budtender that can suffice that for them, fill that void.
Claire, what's your take on how turnover affects growth?
I think turnover 100% affects growth, because every time you hire a new employee, it not only do you have to educate them about the SOPs of how the business works, but you're losing institutional knowledge of all of the products that you offer and all of the SKUs that you offer. And ultimately, you are, cutting into your margins, what limited margins that you do have. More experienced budtenders understand selling techniques like bundling or upselling. And we see, when I used to talk to dispensary owners, they used to tell me like, oh gosh, if I could only get $5 more out of every customer, and having the budtender with the institutional knowledge to understand how to drive up that ticket price. Imagine if 50% of the customers that came in spent just $5 more over the course of a month, what that would add up to over time. So I think when you experience turnover, and also it looks bad to your loyal customers that come in and don't see regular faces, and it affects the morale of the budtenders that do choose to stay. And I think a lot of companies are really doing the best they can under the given circumstances, and I don't think even a lot of dispensary owners would refute any of the things that we're saying, and they're just saying, yeah, like I would like to pay my budtenders more. Let's find a way to do that. So I don't mean to say that it's someone's fault or this or that, but turnover, I really think, cuts into margins and cuts into the institutional knowledge that dispensaries rely on to grow.
Brian, how have you seen turnover affect growth?
It definitely affects growth, but let me throw something out there, just kind of question the universe a little bit. That's interesting, and again, this may be a little more Washington specific, but just in the way that our laws were constructed with the 1,000-foot rule, and you find our retailers / dispensaries literally across the street from each other. There's different business models out there. So it is very, actually I can name you about 10 spots just like this where you will have one retailer whose whole business model is butts in, butts out. Cheap pot, get them in, get them out as fast as they can. Then across the street, you'll have a much smaller retailer. It's not going to do those numbers, but the way that they're going to compete with the guy across the street that's selling cheaper than they are is they're going to have much more educated budtenders. They're going to be much more of a customer experience, and they're banking on the fact that their customers aren't going to mind spending. I'm pulling these numbers out of the air, but they're not going to mind spending $9 a joint as opposed to $7 a joint because they want to go in and have a good experience. But it's just two different separate business models. And what I'm always curious about is the budtender that cares, the budtender that calls it a call-in, like we were talking about, they're going to want to be at that second store. But you've got another issue because you've got those two retailers across the street from each other. That big guy's pushing more product. He's going to actually block certain products out of that smaller one because he's going to say, hey, Mr. Processor, I can sell, X amount of dollars of this a month for you, but you're not allowed to be across the street. And so I'm guessing, again, this is a little bit of a question out in the universe, but here's what you guys think. You could have budtenders that learn about they use the different technologies, they come to different events, they learn about everything, but they can't even talk about that product because it's not in their store because it's getting blocked out by the store across the street. So just like I said, just something I was thinking about, and how that affects turnover could be that budtender in the butts in butts out store not as important to them, I would guess.
So as a follow-up, Brian, it suggested that investing more in budtenders and giving them opportunity to grow and advance with a young company will help increase retention. PayScale actually points out that more employees in the cannabis sector are more optimistic about their company's future than American workers in general. PayScale also lists the median salary for budtenders at $32,000 a year, which is $15.38. That's the minimum wage at SeaTac Airport. Using sales data to pick out when there might be slumps and then incentivizing those employees, like Claire was mentioning, to stick it out past those days is one way. And then if you subscribe to Headset, for example, you might notice that in January, your numbers for the past 3 years are low, and then you could relax the reins on your staff or maybe just be extra nice. And so, Brian, what tech is out there? What tools are available for budtenders and their managers?
Oh boy. So there's a couple right now that are really working to be very budtender specific, and there's two that are coming on the market right now that I can think of right off the top of my head, which is Top Tender based out here in Washington and Lucid Green, which is based out of Massachusetts. Both of them have a model of educating the budtender and then rewarding the budtender for the education. Now they're both working to start establishing scale. They're very, very new on the market, but they're actually using Lucid Green is using cryptocurrency. Top Tender is actually using, I think, Venmo, if I'm not mistaken, to actually monetarily reward the budtender for taking classes, for doing things online that they're then turning around charging the brands for. There's a couple of different avenues to think about that. In that, is this something that the budtender will go to use because they're curious, or is there a way to almost make it where you have to have it? And those are the two that pop off my head. Of course, the one that's always that's been out there for years, and they're doing a lot coming up in the next few months weekly. We don't really think of it much as a budtender app anymore, but they're doing a lot of new things that they're trying to get back to the budtender. So yeah, those are the two that are jumping out in my head.
Claire, has Brightfield Group reported on any tech that budtenders have or their managers can use, or have you seen anything that's empowering these budtenders to make a better educated recommendation?
Well, those are two different questions. So, to give props to Headset, I've known them for years, and part of what their technology does is it helps managers have transparency into budtender performance, so they can more clearly recognize and then therefore incentivize their budtenders that are their highest grossing employees. In terms of educating them on how to make better recommendations, that I don't know, unfortunately. But in terms of employee incentives and tracking sales by employee and that kind of thing, there are technologies available to do that.
Follow up, what tech have you seen that's available for budtenders and their managers, and have you used any that have empowered you to make educational recommendations?
I really think Top Tender is one of the best platforms for Budtenders. It's not only complimentary for them to use, but when they sign up, they receive $20 tax-free. When they encourage their friends to sign up, they receive a $20 referral fee, and their friends still receive $20 for signing up. And on the Budtender platform, it provides a basic paragraph and keynotes about a specific product. And I think it's really important for brands to set themselves apart. Like, I know Mammoth Labs does a really incredible extraction process that is too far scientifically above my head, but the way that they're able to put their bullet points out, it helps the Budtenders understand and be able to sell the product. It helps small brands like American Hash Makers, that where hash is such a niche market, connect with Budtenders and show them how to use hash so they can share with guests who may be trying hash for the first time. So I think Budtender is really hitting the nail on the head, where they have an educational platform that is concise and clear, and also compensates the Budtenders for adding towards their repertoire.
Tyler, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, to expand on the Budtender to point, again, we're really big fans of them, as I'm sure you're well aware. The one thing that I think the best way to build any business is building relationships with people that you talk to, whether it's at an industry event, whether it's a night out in the town, or whether you're maybe even just doing deliveries. I think it's always important to develop that human connection. And one of the benefits about Budtender as well is through their platform, you can actually have videos that you can shoot of your brand. You get to meet the people. Maybe you can give a site tour if you'd like. You can get firsthand visuals of the products via the video, or just basic traditional photography. And I think having that is a great platform, because people get visuals, they get to meet the brand, and they get to learn about it from the people that created that brand themselves. So in a world now where everything is moving more digital and technology is more prevalent than ever before, and especially given the high turnover rate that retailers are facing, how busy everyone is in today's age, it's really difficult for brands like us to come in, have a sit down with retailers and their staff members, and tell them more about us, tell them more about what sets our brand apart, what makes our brand different. So having platforms like Budtender, we bring the education right to them.
Well, we see quite a bit in the states where vertical integration is allowed is they will cross-train their Budtenders on processing as well. So they'll get to kind of learn different aspects of the business, or they may send one of their Budtenders to a conference to learn more about social media marketing in the industry, and what are some best practices for that. And then that Budtender is given the ability to take over the social, maybe one or more of the social media accounts. So we see, different operations getting creative with how they're training these Budtenders, the different opportunities that they're providing to them, especially kind of like David was saying, those Budtenders that are performing really well, and they recognize that they want to retain those Budtenders. So how do you retain them? Well, providing them different educational opportunities. Maybe one of them has always wanted to go to the NCIA conference in San Jose, providing them with that opportunity to get to go to that conference. Maybe one of them has always wanted to get into processing, and so there are a couple of operations that actually do tuition reimbursement, and that person will go and take a chemistry class, and the operation will pay for, that community college chemistry class that they take. So, providing them with opportunities, and, the onus is really, just depending on the size of the organization, the onus is either on the owners, the managers, or the HR business partners or directors, in most cases for these companies, to have these conversations with these employees and say, you're doing a great job. what do we need to do to make sure that we're going to be able to keep you here? Like, what is it you want to do next? What can we provide to you? And that answer could be, you could have, 140,000 different answers for the 140,000 people that are working in the cannabis industry, well, plus, I guess now, that are working in the industry. So it really is more of an individual decision as to kind of what they're looking to do next.
I mean, that's tough. That's tough because I think a lot of it for me is like I am the calling category. I'm the person that I believe this is my calling. I believe that cannabis can change people's lives, and I believe that I can be the stepping stone for people. In terms of technology, there's sites like WikiLeaf, Cannabis Reports specifically.com has been a good resource for me, not only because they provide like genetic information, but they also have links to specific scientific studies about different medical ailments and like the legit scientific studies that's like, ground zero for a specific ailment. So I think that's been a big resource. I think also too, Dockside is a medically endorsed shop, and I just went through my MMC certification process, and the information that I got from that 20-hour course on the history of cannabis and, when THC was discovered and what it did and all that it took to go through that, I think that's a really big, a really useful tool as well. And I think that if you are at a medically endorsed shop and you have the opportunity to be a consultant, you should do it just because of the information you get from that learning, from that course.
If you're part of that 33% calling group, the other group just sees, maybe some shops put up an incentive or you'll get $1 more an hour or something like that, that really people see green, they don't see the passion, and that's that whole 33% that's really in it for their calling opposed to just the culture.
So Ashley, do you see your managers trying to implement some incentives? Since being thrown to the wolves when you first started, have you seen any improvement in terms of the tools available for you to use to make an educated recommendation?
Oh yeah, I was just going to double up. I went through Medical Marijuana 411 as my company to be a consultant, and I've been able to download everything and refer back to it as I need to. Even in the 10-hour continuing education course, there's amazing new studies that just kind of came out in 2017 and 18 that they had in that continuing education course. So it was awesome getting to download all of that. They're not trying to hoard it or, pay us for every little dime.
So I want to dive into why budtenders are quitting. I did an interview with a local union group, the UFCW21, and the adult use retailer with Have a Heart. I did an interview, Ryan, but they made history being the first group to create a union between the union and the adult Rex cannabis retailer. That relationship is quite unusual in a very positive sense, said UFCW local president 21, Todd Crosby. He said it's rare for an employer and their employees to reach a first contract so quickly, and one that's so promising for its current and future employees. These partnerships strengthen individuals, families, and communities and lead to superior service for customers. The contract was intended to improve wages and benefits and provide the workers with a voice in the workplace. And the new agreement includes comprehensive health and welfare coverage and other benefits, as well as training, mentoring programs, and staff development opportunities. The Have a Heart CEO said that at Have a Heart, they believe that they're doing good. They consistently strive to have a positive impact in the neighborhood, to do business, and seeing that partnership with the union as part of the commitment to creating a safe and empowering workplace. And yet at the end of the day, we're still seeing that turnover happening. The dollar amount that you can attribute to each hiring and firing is about $2,000 to hire and train a budtender. And so we can maybe look at unionizing as one strategy to try and retain employees. Ashley, what else can companies do to try and make sure employees don't walk out the door?
I think the turnover that I have witnessed in the last 3 years has been more of Budtenders migrating from retail shop to retail shop. I think the high turnover rate of new unqualified staff would be comparable to any industry. And I know in 2018, through a quick Google search, I found that 1 in 4 low-level employees have an average immediate turnover rate. And so I think that we need to treat the cannabis industry with the same perspective of a restaurant or a dry cleaners or a retail clothing store. It's the same. There's always going to be, a 20-25% turnover with new entry-level team members because they're entry level. They don't necessarily know everything that's expected. And in that training period where HR departments do, for the most part, a pretty good job showing daily expectations, work product requirements, team member goals, perhaps that individual, it may not be something that's cut out for them. And during that training process, they saw that it wasn't the right fit and they move on to another venture in life.
Right. And just to kind of add on to Zahra's point too, I think a lot of Budtenders, again, I would like to reiterate what I said, before, is it really depends as to what the Budtender is looking for. Are they just looking for a job where they show up, or are they looking for a job where they want to excel, gain contacts, maintain relationships? And I think that's one key variable as to why the turnover rate is so high is because, kind of taking your words, sometimes people come to the industry thinking that's a party, and it's a very fun, exciting industry to be a part of, but there's a lot of work involved, and there's a lot of education that's involved as well too, especially for frontline employees, which kind of leads to the next thing as well, is education. Now, maybe Zahra could touch a little bit on this point, but anecdotally speaking, one thing I've saw when I'm in the field and I'm going to retailers and I'm talking to Budtenders is a lot of times at the smaller stores, I've noticed that the turnover rate is a little bit higher. And that may be because since it's a smaller store, there's less, manpower. There's people who have to allocate more time to the direct.
I think the smaller stores, they don't have the ability because from what, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Tyler, but from what I understand from knowing many owners of retail shops is the profit margin of retail shops ranges from about 11 to 16%. And the smaller shops don't have the budget for full health care, for paid time, besides the minimum Washington paid time off, for holiday pay, for retirement accounts. And so the larger shops that provide all of those extra incentives, just like any other industry, will have a lower turnover rate and a higher retention because of the benefits they're able to offer.
Precisely. Yeah, I think human resources, if there's one key takeaway from this question, it would be the human resources aspect. I think a lot of the smaller stores, they don't necessarily have the time and the budget to allocate to things like creating a policy, creating benefits for their employees, creating an education program. And, we're actually kind of advancing a little bit forward. So I know there's great organizations that came out. One is called Talktender, and Talktender is educating, it's bridging the gap between producer processors and the Budtenders. So it's actually educating Budtenders about various products that are available, which again,
for free,
is really helpful. And it's for free too for retailers. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think it's going to be very beneficial for the frontline employees because they're actually going to get, a third-party assistance in terms of education, learning about products, meeting new people, figuring out different strain types and varieties that brands offer. And that's also going to increase sales for the frontline retailers. But I think HR is a key factor as to why the turnover rate is so high amongst Budtenders in the cannabis industry.
Definitely compensate them for their time and education. I mean, depending on experience, that is what a lot of us were hired on, depending on experience. Well, I have a lot more experience than the other fresh 21-year-old that just walked in that has that just wants to sell weed for a living for just a job for right now, and yet we still get paid the same amount. So I don't think that's really taken to heart as a lot of other companies, as a Walmart would do, or a pharmaceutical company. Even if you have a lot more experience, they're going to put you where you belong to begin with, not start you from the bottom.
Alec, what's your take? What else do you think that companies can try and do to make sure employees don't walk out the door?
I think a big part of it is trust. A big thing when I got to Dockside, like I had experience, right? I didn't necessarily need someone kind of looking over my shoulder to tell me what to do all the time, and sometimes that can, get on my nerves, or other people's nerves, right? So when I got to Dockside, it was just like, okay, go, have fun, like, do your thing. And like, I feel like, oversight is important and all, but just trusting that your Budtenders, or having the ability to trust your Budtender and what they're doing and how they're doing it, I think is a big thing, instead of trying to, puppet master kind of everything. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, Brian, what's your take on it?
So it's funny. I'm fortunate in our role that we get to know a lot of these retail owners. They're our customers, and as we're talking about, we've got that 30-something% that consider it a calling, and we've got that 10 or 12% that are trying to work their way up in management. Maybe they've got a degree. They're trying to do that. The problem is that leaves 60% that, like Ashley just said, 21-year-old, maybe I'm going to college, maybe I'm not. I just want to make some little money. I want to get discounts on my pot. And like anything else in this world, you get more frustrated by the ones or you're affected more by the ones that frustrate you than the ones that do things right. And and even as a business owner myself, and knowing a lot of these guys, look, I mean, I don't know about Dockside or Green Lady, but I don't even know if they're offering benefits. I mean, that's a huge thing in my company of what I do with my employees is offering benefits. So I mean, it's going to be hard to get somebody that may have started in their early 20s and didn't really care, but now they're getting into 30 and they really want to, and if they're not getting benefits, that's huge in this country right now. I think so, but at the same time, like I said, not at the same time, but talking to a lot of these retail owners, they get frustrated by the 60% that are just there that are in and out the door, and that are doing this or that. And what ends up making the dynamic also add to that intrigue with it, and this really doesn't have to do that much with Budtender retention, but it has to do a little bit with brand retention, because the brands now are also looking at it as they're trying to market the Budtenders because they want to get the two of you. But in order to get to the two of you, they have to give swag and spend a lot of money on 4 other people that don't really care. And so it's been really interesting. I was talking to Patrick, CEO of Soulshine, today. I don't think he'll mind me calling his name out on this one, because he went through, it's been really funny. I've known Patrick for a long time. And he has gone through with us a big series of what he puts his marketing budget towards Budtenders and what he doesn't. He put a whole bunch in early and said, like we talked about, didn't know about the ROI, pulled it back out. Now he starts putting it back in. And then he's coming to me and saying, Brian, you've got to do more and more often, because the turnover is so fast that we have to get to these guys at least once a quarter, because we know we're going to have the Ashleys and everybody back, probably for 2 to 3 a year, but we got to get to all those other ones. And so they're starting to realize that marketing budget has to go to that, because at the end of the day, you've got to talk to all those guys, and they turn over a lot. And that marketing budget is not cheap. I mean, that's not cheap for these guys, and not all of them are making, as you, I'm sure, have talked about 100 times in this podcast, contrary to popular belief, everybody thinks that every marijuana is making millions and millions of dollars. And the reality is there's 2 or 3 of them that are. The rest of us are plugging along as fast as we can. So I mean, just kind of a little thought out there that I had.
So being a cannabis business podcast, I wanted to provide maybe a solution or an idea for a solution with all of the turnover. So this last question is just one based on my own research. And so there's a lot of ways that we can get budtenders to stay. One is probably the most obvious here is performance. Setting people up to sell well is probably the biggest win-win in any retail environment. Headsets numbers confirm that. Beyond just creating high performers, treating the ones that you have well is also super important. So if turnover is lowest amongst highest performers, it follows that people who have been around longer tend to be better at their jobs. And by extension, the high rate of early hire turnover isn't terribly surprising either. This might just be that the industry is weeding out those who aren't right for it. So to retain budtenders, a cannabis retailer can offer competitive pay, healthcare, ongoing education, performance incentives. But the key, industry insiders told Marijuana Business Magazine, is that to keep budtenders engaged and make them feel valid is just more than that. And so I did my own research on what is the best opportunity for highest sales performers, what keeps people engaged, what is the highest amount of morale that you can create. And it really came down to an acronym called Team Icon. And so I just grabbed 7 out of like the top 10 things that everybody wanted, and it made this acronym called Team Icon, and Alec started it with trust. So Team Icon stands for to trust your employees, or trust your budtenders, empower your budtenders, appreciate them, mentor them, involve them, challenge them, and keep them feeling like they're on a mission. So again, Team Icon is this thing where whatever you want to do, you want to have the best sales performance, the highest morale, the cheeks and seats the longest, or the best sales group. As long as you have Team Icon, from the research I've done, the only thing it doesn't really cover is pay them well and promote them. If they follow Team Icon, they will be paid well, and promotion is just a title. You can give them whatever title you want. As long as you trust them, empower them, appreciate them, mentor them, and keep them involved, challenged, and on a mission, Team Icon might be able to keep your budtenders from leaving. And budtenders, as we know, is the difference between bankruptcy and billions. So having said that, Team Icon, if your employer trusted you and empowered you, appreciated you, mentored you, and kept you involved, challenged, and on a mission, would that stem that flow of turnover? Ashley, what's your opinion?
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of companies that are, I shouldn't say a lot, in the cannabis industry it is still evolving, but we see companies that have values that they have set up, or they have a commitment, what they call like a commitment to their employees. It might be up on their break room where it says commitment to you, and it will say, a variation of some of those components that you just mentioned. So it is great in theory. It has to be something that is you see in execution, and that you stick to every single day, and something that you refer back to every single day. That okay, this is one of our tenants, is one of the other things that we'll see them called. But what we unfortunately more often than not see is a lot of companies will, put it up on the break room wall and say, this is our commitment to you, and then there's no execution on it. It's just a poster for PR purposes that's on a wall. So as long as companies have the bandwidth and have the drive to ensure execution of commitments they're making to their employees like that, then it's great, but they need to be ready to execute.
I feel like, in any industry, not just cannabis, but any job I've ever had, that would be for the uppers and management to really focus on those things. The other two, pay and promotions, will come hand in hand, because they'll see what you're doing and they will trust you to do that job to its full extent.
Exactly. And Alec, how about for you, all of the concerns you've had and the things you've seen, if a company were to implement Team Icon, would that drastically change the amount of turnover?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summation of what is required in this industry for not only budtenders, but the shop to shine and be better for customers and the Budtenders itself. And I think that part of that could integrate this feedback from Budtenders to take it seriously. Like if I go tell my manager something that I'm concerned about, that needs to be taken seriously, like especially if there's a product on the board, I'm not sure. So I think integrating that, I think that's really good to what should happen.
And your employers have actually kind of taken you up on that, because I met you at Dockside because you had a recycling program. So you saw a need, you went out and you kind of designed that own company. So give us a brief outline of that.
So Canacycle is, first of all, not my company. It's my friend Eric Klaus is the owner of Canacycle. Started it when I used to work at Origin with them. And it's a recycling program for cannabis packaging specifically. And that's a big need in our industry, because I mean, we have to have packaging. We have to have sealed, shut packaging when it gets in the store. And what do we do with it? It's the question. So Canacycle currently, we have about a dozen different drop points where you can recycle glass, specifically plastics, kind of next step, right? But it's something that the industry desperately needs because, as a new industry, there's a lot of skeptical people about cannabis specifically, and we want to have a good, face to the public. We want to have a good relationship with the greater society as well. And I think that Canacycle is a really important program that is going to make a big difference in the future. Yes, exactly. And the big hurdle that we're dealing with right now is that we can't have these return bins inside a 502 dispensary. It's open packaging, even though there's not something in it.
Open container like alcohol.
Yes, exactly. So when it's on, even if it's empty. So our first thing was at Origin. How we get around it. There's a merchant who's not 5.
Yeah, that's right. I think Green Lady is going to sign in on that, but I seen it at Tony's Variety Smoke Shop right down the road. So if the smoke shops, if they don't want to have open packages in there either, because LCD does visit them too for CBD checks and whatnot, then or if LCD decides to, that would be the worst thing for the Canacycle right now.
And Brian, what's your opinion in terms of if a company were to implement Team Icon, is that going to help the industry with turnover?
100%. I've been fortunate to get to know a lot of Budtenders and get to know a lot of them very well, and interact with them quite a bit. And one of the biggest complaints that I get from Budtenders, they just don't feel like they're appreciated. They don't feel like they're appreciated by their employers. And again, as a business owner myself, sometimes I kind of say I get frustrated with people too sometimes. But the recognition, and then like Ashley said, the pay and the promotion will come with it, as long as you feel important. But you've got to make, and this is true of me, like Ashley said, you've got to make your employees feel like you want them there, like they are important to you, and that they are, because they are the lifeblood of your business. I mean, and you have a business, I have a business, but neither of us have a retailer. But as a retailer, or even as an industry as a whole, the Budtender is the lifeblood of our industry, because there's no other way to tell people about your product. And so I get it, as a business owner, sometimes there's frustration, but you cannot let that that alter what's most important, is that your employees feel like and understand, this is true. You have no business without your employees. And if your employees are unhappy, they're not going to perform for you as well. And, we've all been there where, what can I pay? What can I afford to pay? There's so many things that a lot of employees don't understand. You got taxes, you've got overhead, you've got all these other things, but making them feel important, that's not hard. That's not hard. And the rest hopefully will come later.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. I want to thank all my guests for being here with the Budtender panel. That's Alec Langston. He's a Budtender at Dockside Cannabis. Brian Yeager right here, CEO of lemonhaze.com. We have Ashley Hirchert, Budtender at Green Lady Pot Shop in Olympia. On the line with us is Rebecca Berry, Senior Account Manager at Wurk. And also on the line with us is Claire Kaufmann, Director of Client Services at Brightfield Group.
Previously recorded is Tom Gieger, Communications Director of the union in Seattle, UFCW21. Also, Kara Bradford and David Muret, co-founders at Viridian Staffing. And Zahra, Kohl, and Tyler Nesterenko of Budtenders Ball.
So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.